Good evening to those bored enough to watch. I love Sonic the Hedgehog. I'm unsure of how vocal I've been regarding that, but Sonic is a series of games that I love to bits and I'm not afraid in admitting that as much as I used to. I grew up with games like Sonic Unleashed in the Wii and Sonic Colors, and if anything, have continued to play these games whenever the opportunity arises. Yes, you could say that I've spent a large duration of my childhood with Sonic games that were met with poor reception from fans, but understand this. As a young child at the time who wasn't necessarily looking at reviews of games I wanted to play, I didn't really care about what the internet thought at the time, and while I always go with the mindset of trying a game out for myself before formulating an opinion on it, I generally try not to let the unanimous agreement of a community dictate my opinion on a game. Sometimes I'd agree and other times I wouldn't, but I always like to try a game out for myself before formulating an opinion on it, as one should. Now, the game I want to talk about in this video is one that I was never really able to play until sometime last year. Like I said, a lot of the Sonic games I played when I was young were mostly on the Wii and subsequent consoles, yet when I saw the game on sale one day on Steam, I wanted to try it out for myself. I wanted to know what I was missing out on. No, this video isn't going to be about my newfound love for Sonic games. I loved them before I played this game. You could say that this game only strengthened that, but it didn't kickstart it, because it was already there. I wanted to fill the gap of playing the games that came out before the ones I primarily grew up with, and when I played this game for the first time, I loved it, and I still do looking back. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Sonic Adventure, a game that has unfortunately had a lengthy and rocky development story, and I want to discuss that, beginning with Sonic Extreme. As many of us know, during the early 1990s, Sega had become one of the most successful video game companies as a result of the hit that was the Sega Genesis, and its flagship franchise, Sonic the Hedgehog. During this time, the series' co-creator Yuji Naka had worked with the Sega's STI team to create Sonic games in the United States. After the completion of Sonic & Knuckles in 1994, he returned to Japan to work with Sonic Team. With that, the team at Sega's STI were left with American staff, which led to the conceptualization of an experimental Sonic game by the name of Sonic Crackers, which later became Knuckles' Chaotix. That alongside another idea that the head of the STI, Roger Hector, was disapproved by Sega's management as a result of them being disinterested in a Sonic spin-off game. This led to the beginning of the development of Sonic Extreme in 1994. Michael Kosaka was the executive producer and team leader, and the game's designer and CGI artist Sen created animations to pitch the game to Sega executives. As newer consoles in the 32-bit era of gaming were on the way, the game was moved to release to the 32X under the working titles Sonic 32X, Sonic Mars, and Project Mars. All seemed to be going well with Sonic Extreme. Several ideas to both gameplay and design were conceptualized, and it seemed as though this game was going to be smoothly developed with few hiccups along that journey. This is a tangent I would have continued, but in mid-1995, Kosaka had resigned from the project. According to Sen, who stated, "Kosaka and the executive producer Dean Lester were not getting along, and I believe that Michael felt it was his best option to simply remove himself from what he thought was a politically unhealthy environment." Lester had later resigned that same year, and was replaced by Manny Granillo. Wallace, who had worked on the Genesis games, the Ooze, and Comics Zone, was placed in charge of Sonic Extreme. Lead programmer Don Goddard was replaced with Olfa Allon, who some staff found difficult to work with, stating that he didn't share his work. As the design had changed significantly as the 32X struggled commercially, development moved to a planned Sega cartridge console that would be powered by Nvidia 3D hardware. This would be able to compete with the upcoming Nintendo 64. Ultimately, development on Sonic Extreme was cancelled, and it was the cancellation that led to the development of Sonic Adventure 1. It was also this that led to the failure of the Sega Saturn, as it was left without an original Sonic game. It's said that Yuji Naka's refusal to let the Sega's STI team use the Knights engine was instrumental to the cancellation of this game. Naka wanted a 3D game, but he thought that such an endeavor should be undertaken by Sonic Team. But due to a lack of Sonic games on the Saturn, it's said that the franchise had already become a part of the background by mid-1997. Astonishing for one that had made its debut just 6 years earlier. But with there being no Sonic game on the Sega Saturn, the console failed, and with only a port of 3D Blast to it, the console was unfortunately doomed without an original game to its name. So, shortly after the completion of Nights into Dreams, Iizuka proposed the idea of Sonic Adventure, with a greater emphasis on storytelling. Development on the game had started with a 20-strong team, and through the use of the Knights engine, they were able to create the first prototype for the game. However, the Saturn's limited capabilities made work on the game difficult. This is when the development team learned that the Sega Saturn's successor, the Dreamcast, was nearing completion. It's here that they decided to move development to the Sega Dreamcast. Here they could take advantage of the system's higher quantity of RAM, stronger CPU, and VMU, but not wanting to waste their work on the Saturn, they released Sonic Jam, the final Sonic game on that console. Development on the Dreamcast began on July 1997, while Iizuka directed, Naka produced, and this game was one of the largest games being created at the time, with the team growing to 60 strong in the span of 10 months, and over 100 developers working on the game in total. This game was being developed in conjunction with the Dreamcast, aiming for a release in 1998, even if this meant that they would need to make improvements after release. release. The Dreamcast wouldn't be completed until 2 months before the game's release, and this definitely did give Iizuka influence on the console's development. For example, he requested that the console have more RAM specifically for the purpose of developing Sonic Adventure. A lot of love went into this game. A lot of trials and tribulations were involved in the development of this game, with the rough development on Sonic Extreme, to the transition into developing the game for an entirely new system. The developers had a multitude of large roadblocks to overcome, and they delivered a fantastic game. The version I'm going to be covering in this video is that of the DX version released for Steam in 2011. I won't be using any mods for this video, as I want to specifically talk about the version put out by Sonic Team for this platform. So with that, let's discuss Sonic Adventure. Before I discuss the gameplay and story of this game, I want to give a brief rundown of how the gameplay works. In this game, it's split into 6 different styles of such a thing. For example, Sonic is a faithful recreation of gameplay seen in the Sega Genesis era of games adapted for a 3D plane, with Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Big the Cat, and E102 Gamma having their own gameplay styles of which you can play depending on the respective story you choose to play. The game's story depicts that of the same story being told from different perspectives, with Sonic's being the longest and others varying depending on the character. However, each character goes through their own arc in their stories, something of which I'll get into later. In this video, I'm going to mostly be going over Sonic's story, and briefly discuss the other characters' stories later. So with that, let's discuss the gameplay. The game begins with a night in Station Square. Aside from a helicopter and this mysterious red orb you should keep in the back of your head for now fly through the city, Sonic is roaming, jumping from building to building and overall having a fun time in the city, until he spots a group of police cars driving past. Curious, he follows them. Here, we see a scene of police surrounding a watery figure. Upon opening fire, they retreat as their bullets do no damage. As they clear, Sonic arrives, and this initiates a boss fight against Chaos Zero. Throughout the duration of this game, we'll be fighting him more as his form gradually evolves as we progress. For now, we're fighting Chaos Zero, a fight that's fairly easy. After that though, he makes his escape, and looking from the top of a building, Eggman has something planned, where Sonic sees Tails flying his plane before ultimately crashing it. With that, we go to recover him from the crash site, thus opening up the first stage, Emerald Coast. This stage is definitely a good introductory stage to the gameplay of this game, and it's one that I enjoyed a lot, with there being a lot of branching pathways and items and such that reward you as the player for your exploration of the stages. I want to take this opportunity to discuss Sonic's gameplay specifically. I actually really enjoyed his gameplay. As I said earlier, not only is it a good conversion of Sonic's 2D attributes into 3D, but it's also a good way of introducing new players to the stellar gameplay. In my eyes, this game captures what made the Genesis classics so unique, and at the same time has its own charm. It captures its own identity, and for that reason, Sonic's gameplay was fun overall. The platforming, the flow of the stage and everything else flows seamlessly to create something truly memorable. After the stage, we cut to a conversation between the two. Tails explains that he had found a Chaos Emerald during one of his test flights, and wanted to use it as a power supply for his own stage. With that, he tells Sonic to meet him at his workshop, which is in the Mystic Ruins, because he has something he wants to show him. Once we're at the Mystic Ruins, we run into Eggman, of whom demands the Chaos Emerald, thus initiating a boss fight, which wasn't necessarily very difficult, especially when you can do as I did and just hit him several times consecutively. After the fight, Eggman takes the Chaos Emerald that Tails had, because he apparently had it out for some reason, and summons Chaos once again, telling us that Chaos requires all 7 Chaos Emeralds to reach his full potential, which Eggman intends to use to destroy Station Square. With that, they leave and Sonic and Tails come up with a plan to gain all of the 7 Chaos Emeralds before Eggman does. After using this green key at this section here, we open up the second stage, Windy Valley. This stage was definitely an interesting one that I liked a lot. It contained a lot of memorable moments such as being sucked into a tornado and having to make your way out of such a thing, as well as the level design being fun to play through overall. After this stage, we acquire a Chaos Emerald and return to the Mystic Ruins. Now we head back to Station Square, where we head into the sewers and find the Lightspeed shoes. This will be instrumental for accessing the next stage of the game, so we acquire them and head to the casino area, where we now use the Lightspeed dash to open the casino doors and access the next stage, Casinopolis. This stage is definitely a change of pace to the other ones we've played thus far. The previous stage is focused on speed and level design, whereas this one opts to focus on the gimmick of being in a casino. In this stage, you need to collect rings and deposit them here so that you can gain enough height to reach the emerald. It's definitely a change of pace, as you need to repeatedly go through this area after you play pinball to have a final chance at gaining as many rings as possible to reach it. And I found it to be a welcome change of pace too. While I'm definitely a fan of the style of layout in the previous stages, I liked the layout in this stage because it introduces a gimmick of some kind while simultaneously remaining true to the style of the previous stages. After completing the stage though, Eggman tries to attack Sonic, whom drops the emerald he just got on the ground. Upon trying to collect it, Eggman sprays him with a gas of some kind, end putting Sonic and Tails into a sleep. When they wake up, they find that the emerald was taken, but they still have another. With that, we're left to search elsewhere to find the other emerald. With that, we gather this ice key and take it to the Mystic Ruins to open the next stage, Ice Cap. This stage, to me, houses one of the most iconic moments in Sonic's story, starting with a calm and collected setting, a cold cavern of which we must make our way through to find the emerald. But once we get to the outside, the music flares up as we're thrown into an action sequence as Sonic snowboards away from a horde of snow falling towards him. I loved this moment of the game, and it seriously captures what makes this game so thrilling to play for me. The speed, the action, and the music among many other aspects of this sequence here seriously is what I appreciate about this stage. Once we collect the emerald, we meet Knuckles outside who tries to attack us, telling us to hand him the emeralds we have, thus initiating a very easy boss fight, which ultimately ends in a stalemate. Eggman arrives once the emeralds are knocked away from Sonic's possession and takes them to feed Chaos, in which now we must fight Chaos 4. We need to stand on these lily pads and always be on the move throughout the fight, as if we don't, we'll drown. Once the fight is over, we see the egg carrier's first appearance. Eggman departs into it, of which Sonic and Tails decide to go and chase after it in the tornado. Once we're in the tornado, we initiate a minigame which sees us shooting incoming enemies sent by Eggman to stop us as we make our way to the egg carrier. This minigame definitely was entertaining. It was short and sweet, and for that reason I definitely did appreciate this brief change of pace. Once we get to the end, we get hit by the egg carrier and fall out of the sky, separating Sonic and Tails. While Sonic lands in Station Square, it's unclear where Tails landed, and it's through here that he decides to go and look for him. However, he runs into Amy, who tags along with Sonic in order to protect a bird that one of Eggman's robots seemed to be after. It's through one of the encounters with them that Amy runs off into Twinkle Park, and Sonic follows in search of her. This stage is definitely very interesting as well, introducing the gimmick of go-karting to get to the main stage. I definitely found it to be very enjoyable, and the main stage equally as so. We complete the stage, but are still yet to find Amy. We find an ID card, which we take to a large metal door next to Twinkle Park to enter the next stage, Speed Highway. This stage is one that was absolutely wonderful to play through. I liked the flow of the level design that this stage possessed, and while it's obviously not exclusive to this stage, I also appreciated the way that this stage depicted the progression of the day, starting while the night is present, but as we reach the end of the stage, the sun is rising as it turns daytime. I liked this progression and detail a lot, and figured it was something worth mentioning. With that though, we complete the stage and find Amy being taken away by the robot that was chasing after her in Twinkle Park. Through here, Sonic cuts it off at the Mystic Ruins. However, before any confrontation is initiated, the egg carrier arrives to take them away. As a result, we venture into the Mystic Ruins further, gain the Lightspeed attack, and unlock the next stage, Red Mountain. This stage sees us starting on a mountain, but as we go further, we ascend into and out of a volcano to ultimately catch up to the egg carrier. When we reach the end of the stage, it seems as though we're too late until Tails arrives, with the new and improved Tornado 2 that will allow for us to successfully land on the egg carrier this time, initiating the second Sky Chase minigame. This iteration of it is definitely a lot more harder and challenging, as this time there's more things being thrown at you as you must either shoot them down or dodge them entirely, with the ending section of the minigame being that of a battle between yourself and the egg carrier, this time successfully shooting down what knocked you out of the air in your previous flight. Once we land on the egg carrier, we set off to find Amy. However, before we can do so, Eggman alters the form of the egg carrier, meaning the only way for us to get to him is through the sky deck, thus initiating the stage. Through the stage, we play as the sky deck becomes more and more destroyed the further we go in. With that, I partially dislike this stage. While it has a good premise to it that's explored thoroughly throughout, it is definitely one of the more janky stages that I played throughout Sonic's story. There were times where I fell through the map, and times where the camera was consistently hindering my progress on the stage. While it is completable, these issues ultimately make it difficult to enjoy the stage as much as I have with the other ones. With that, after we complete the stage, we check out the bridge. Here, we finally meet Eggman, who has Amy with him. He takes a Chaos Emerald from the bird that Amy had been protecting this entire time, and summons Gamma to fight us, after of which Sonic is stopped from finishing it as Amy steps in, and it's through there that the three separate, with Tails and Amy getting out of the egg carrier, whereas Sonic opts to stay behind and go after Eggman. After reverting the ship back to its original form, we meet Chaos, Big and Eggman at the front. Big, who's there trying to save Froggy, steps aside as we fight Chaos 6. I liked this fight a lot. It came up with a creative way to change things up, as you need to throw these robots at him to freeze him to then attack. After that though, Knuckles catches up to us, and we pursue as Eggman tries to make his escape. Landing in the Mystic Ruins, this red orb signals us towards a temple of some sort, which initiates the next stage, the Lost World. This stage is definitely a fun one to play through, and at times was somewhat frustrating to play through here as well. These segments where the collision were at some points very odd, or the room where you need to point the mirror at the lights, being overly specific on where you need to point the mirror at for any result to occur. Other than that though, I still had fun with this stage and found it intriguing with the amount of gimmicks it introduces. With that, we complete the stage and are led to some kind kind of mural. It's here that we're taken to the flashback, depicting a young girl standing in front of flames on the Master Emerald, promising to stop something as she walks towards it. And we find ourselves back in the present day. Sonic sees Eggman and follows him to his base. With that, we initiate the final stage of Sonic's story, the final egg. This stage is definitely one of my favorite stages below Ice Cap, mostly due to the fact that I appreciate how climactic this stage feels. The music sets the mood of Sonic speeding his way through Eggman's space to finally get to him, and I generally like the stage mostly because it was one of the most fun for me. After the stage, however, we find Eggman and initiate the fight against the Egg Viper. I'm unsure if I'm just bad at the game. This fight was definitely a rather difficult one, and there were several times where I got knocked off the map after getting hit, among many other things. However, we defeat Eggman, and thus conclude Sonic's story. Now I want to discuss Tails' story, which begins with his test flight which saw him crash and be rescued by Sonic in his story, with Tails making his way to the Mystic Ruins to get to his workshop. One of the things I want to mention about the story in this game is that while it is the same story being told from differing perspectives, sometimes you might play through the same event from a different point of view. For example, the Egg Hornet is a fight that you must play through in Sonic and Tails' story, with only differing dialogue in each version. Furthermore, the story changes depending on what the respective character you're playing as was doing at the time. For example, we'd see what Tails was doing when Sonic and himself were shot out of the sky, what he was doing after the two separated at the egg carrier and Sonic went to go and pursue Eggman. But I'll discuss that later. For now, I want to talk about Tails' gameplay. In it, we race Sonic to the finish line, as we need to get to the end of the stage before he does. In Tails' iteration, the stages are optimized with shortcuts and the sort that we can take to get ahead of Sonic, or you can just be like me and cheese the stage. I like Tails' gameplay. It doesn't lose that fast-paced nature that Sonic's had and finds a way to innovate it in a way so that it isn't the same thing again. However, I do feel as though that it would have been better if Tails had his own stages, mostly due to the fact that these stages, as you're seeing here, are genuinely very easy to cheese, and it's clear that Sonic's stages were not built for Tails' gameplay. With that, here's a rundown of the stages in Tails' story. Casinopolis is the section of which you'd play through as Sonic to get as many rings as possible. Ice Cap is the snowboard chase we played through in Sonic's story, this time racing against him. We fight Knuckles and Chaos 4, and then replay the Sky Chase minigame. After that, we're brought to a flashback where Tails and Sonic first met. Back to the present, however, Tails reminisces about how he owed so much to Sonic before setting off to find a Chaos Emerald. To me, this cutscene resembles the beginning of Tails' arc in this game, where he slowly begins to realize that he is capable of so much more than being within Sonic's shadow, and that he attempts to strive to be so much more and be his own person. It's the beginning of Tails' independence. He wants to help Sonic, but in a way that isn't just him following him around, which ties seamlessly into what we must do next. Find a Chaos Emerald to finish the prototype that Tails was working on. We venture into the jungle, where we see a Chaos Emerald be taken by a frog, in which we must chase it into the desert, thus initiating the minigame, Sandy Hill. After which we catch it, this red orb once again sends us into an area filled with echidnas, but you have the option to collect the rhythm badge. But you then encounter a girl by the name of Tikal, who's reciting a saying that her grandmother had taught her. She explains that there is a possible correlation between this saying and the Chaos Emerald, but before we can find out anything more, we awaken the Mystic Ruins, where the frog escapes and Big pursues it. With the Chaos Emerald, we go to Tails' workshop. We cut to us finding Sonic, and thus the second iteration of the Sky Chase minigame begins, of which we must replay. I'm sorry to say, but did I really need to replay this again? I didn't have an issue playing them in Sonic's story because as the first story you're intended to play in this game, it's understandable that the developers want you to see as much as there is to offer. But with Tails' story, there isn't anything new to the minigame. If anything, it was a drag to play through mostly because I'd already played it through in Sonic's story. However, once we complete it, we play through the Skydeck stage, after which we fight Gamma and return to Station Square. We see Eggman land his ruined vehicle there, of which he decides to go and destroy the entirety of Station Square on his own. When his missile turns out to be a dud, he goes to try and detonate it himself, leading Tails to pursue him and get to the missile before he does, thus initiating Speed Highway. In this iteration, it's a race against Eggman, as you must race your way to the end, and after doing so, you fight the Egg Walker. This boss fight for me wasn't as difficult as the Egg Viper, but nonetheless was an interesting fight, as we need to wait for Eggman to try and stomp you so we can cause the legs to fall by attacking it, allowing for us to attack, and thus you need to repeat this until you deplete all of his health, after of which you complete the fight. Tails returns to the Mystic Ruins to meet Sonic, thus concluding his story. I really enjoyed Tails' story. It provided a necessary arc for his character to develop into something more than just being Sonic's sidekick, and I think the way it goes about doing so is great. With that, I want to talk about Knuckles' story, which begins with Knuckles monologuing about how he has been given the job of guarding the Master Emerald, before Chaos arrives and breaks the Master Emerald into several pieces, scattering everywhere. With that, we, as Knuckles, must find them all to rebuild the Emerald, and with that, we begin the first stage, Speed Highway. Knuckles' gameplay consists of us needing to search the given areas in the stage to find the pieces of the Emerald, which randomly spawn each time a stage is loaded. This means that each time you play through the stage would be less likely to find the Emerald in the same position. Knuckles' gameplay in Sonic Adventure is is definitely an interesting way of going about changing things up, and you're definitely going to spend a lot longer in Knuckles' stages compared to Sonic and Tails. However, the good thing about these stages is that they give you a sizable chunk to explore while still keeping the stages small, as to not completely overwhelm the player with too many things to look into when searching for the emerald pieces. With that, we complete the stage. After that, we play through Casinopolis, after of which we're taken into another flashback area, where we see Tikal pleading with her father not to take the holy grounds of others. But he combats this, stating that the 7 Chaos Emeralds are essential to their survival. With that, we're taken back to Station Square. Entering the hotel, we see Eggman with something in his hand and pursue him to the 2nd floor. It's here that we fight Chaos 2, after of which Eggman tricks Knuckles into thinking that Sonic is after the pieces of the Master Emerald, and thus we set off to the Mystic Ruins. After entering the cave near Tails' workshop, we gain the Shovel Claw upgrade, after of which we take the switch and head to the area of which we'd need to go to play through Red Mountain, after of which we fight Sonic, and subsequently Chaos 4 again, after of which Sonic and Tails go after the Egg Carrier, while Knuckles stays behind to continue his search for the Master Emerald pieces. In the jungle, we must find 2 keys to open the Lost World, and if you want you can also collect the fighting gloves. After finding 2 keys, we open the temple to the Lost World, where we play through the stage, after of which we're taken to a flashback scene once again, where we see Tikal pleading to get all of the Chow out of the area, as her father is coming shortly, after of which it seemingly refuses. She says she'll try speaking with him again. This is where we return to the present day's altar, where we put the pieces of the Master Emerald we currently have back together again, and determine the remaining pieces to be on the Egg Carrier. Gamma appears, and it's through here that we decide to follow it to the Egg Carrier. It's here that we play through the sky deck to find the remaining pieces, before we're taken into another flashback scene again, this time witnessing a wrecked altar site, with engulfing flames and an injured Tikal walking up to the Master Emerald. With that, before we can see anything more, we return to the present day, where we catch up to Sonic and Eggman who leave the destroyed Egg Carrier, with now only Knuckles and Chaos 6, thus initiating a fight. This one is slightly different to Sonic's iteration of the fight. Here we need to still freeze it, but we go about doing so differently. However, after the fight, Knuckles returns to the Mystic Ruins to repair the Master Emerald, monologuing about how he doesn't know the full story of why he was given the job of protecting it, but maybe it's better off that way, thus concluding Knuckles' story. Now I want to talk about Amy's story, which begins with Amy seemingly running her normal errands, monologuing about how she misses Sonic being around, before she sees the Egg Carrier tower over Station Square and a bird flies into her. Noticing that it's hurt and that one of Eggman's robots is after it, she decides to protect it, after of which we run into Sonic at the casino area, which is where that interaction with Amy happens in his story, thus leading to the stage in Twinkle Park. With that, Amy's gameplay sees you make your way through a stage while simultaneously trying to escape Eggman's robot, which will chase you throughout numerous parts of the stage. Playing through Amy's iteration of Twinkle Park was an experience that was decent enough for me, but was solid when I got to this part of the stage where the controls randomly invert without warning. It doesn't help that previously in the stage this didn't happen, but randomly does when you get to this area where you see me hugging the wall and slow to a crawl. With that though, we get to the end of the stage. After that, we enter a cutscene where we see ourselves freed from Eggman's grasp by Gamma. After that, we need to make our way through the hot shelter, after of which we're taken to yet another flashback scene, which, at the altar, we see Tikal with the Chow, before she sees something form in the surrounding water, but before she can see anything more, we're taken back to the present day. Once we're out, we trigger a cutscene which sees the emerald being taken from the bird that Amy was protecting. When Gamma arrives and Sonic is about to take him out, Amy steps in and stops Sonic from finishing him, after of which Amy and Tails leave. But before they do, Amy tells Gamma to set himself free, that he doesn't have to work for Eggman anymore. And with that, they leave. After this, we see a monologue from Amy who says that she should be more independent with herself and stop relying on Sonic so much, and it's here that she decides to aid the bird in reuniting with its family. The first place we decide to check out is the final egg, in which we play through a stage. After not finding any sign of his family, we head to the Egg Carrier. There, we find them, but as they get ready to depart, Zero, Eggman's robot, arrives and injures the bird. Enraged, Amy engages in a boss fight with it, after of which, the birds depart once and for all. Seeing this, Amy vows to be more independent, thus ending her story. I liked this story. Sure, playing as Amy was decent at best and other times infuriating, but nonetheless I enjoyed her story, and how, akin to Tails, she becomes something more than what she was initially established as in her debut game, finally becoming more independent and less reliant on Sonic. With that, I want to talk about Big the Cat's story, which starts on a night where Big is sleeping. Froggy notices a body of water of some sort. When it comes towards him, he seemingly consumes it whole. We cut to the next morning where Big notices Froggy's odd appearance as well as strange behavior, and consumes a Chaos Emerald he had and runs into Station Square. After following him into a sewer, we find ourselves in Twinkle Park, thus initiating the stage. Here's a completely original take. I don't like Big's gameplay. I know there are a few people who dislike Tails and Amy's gameplay, but for me, I was tolerant of their gameplay at worst and actually enjoyed myself with them most of the time. But Big's gameplay for me was the straw that broke the camel's back, mostly because it was the most dysfunctional one to play through. His levels are the biggest drag I've seen thus far. In it, you must play this half-baked fishing minigame that makes you need to fish for Froggy, even though I thought this was a 3D platformer game. I don't mind the game branching out, but did this really have to be necessary? Every playstyle we've seen up until this point has had some correlation to platforming, except for this one, and uncoincidentally, it's the least enjoyable. I've played Sonic Adventure a handful of times prior to making this video, and each time I have found myself hating playing through Big's story. So for that reason, and I apologize to all of the fishing minigame lovers watching this video, I completely skipped Big's story and moved on to Gamma's. So that's also what I'll be doing here. I do not like Big's story in the slightest, and while normally, whether it be for the sake of a video or not, I'm willing to suffer through something I dislike. In this case, I did not want to play through this story. Your fishing rod could be right next to Froggy and he wouldn't even go after it even though other fish would. The camera was the worst part of this minigame for me, because at any moment in time where I attempted to try and catch Froggy, the camera would be restrictive and position itself in an odd way so that it would be hard to navigate the bait. Another issue I have with this is why it needed to be mandatory in the first place. I thought this was a platformer, not a sports game. The reason I was able to tolerate the other stories in this game at the very least was because each one had some correlation to platforming, while ultimately being different in their own way. I don't see it as a coincidence that this is the only story in the game that diverts from the concept of platforming and is the one that is the worst to play through. It's either that this should have had more time and refinement, or just should not have been made at all. It isn't helped that the entirety of what led to Big's creation is just Sonic Team implementing a fishing rod with no use or context whatsoever, and that alone led to his creation. But a lot could have come from it given the right amount of refinement. The story felt like an afterthought, with the gameplay being so janky and half-baked at times, to the point where some people never even bothered to see the game to the end because of it. I'm just lucky I had bothered to suffer through this story when I first played through this game and never deleted that save file. Big's story is the worst part of this game for me, and I dislike it a lot. I want to talk about the sixth and final playable character in Sonic Adventure, E102 Gamma, which starts with Eggman bringing something online for the first time, welcoming his new creation to the final egg, E102, codenamed Gamma, and that we need to head into the final egg to train, and that E101 beta is already within there. This is where we play through the first stage of Gamma's story. The gameplay here is essentially that of a shooter while making your way through a stage. You need to make your way through a stage in a given amount of time. The more enemies you kill, the more time you get. I actually really liked Gamma's playstyle. It's a lot more polished and enjoyable than Big's, and I really like the way the game encourages you to engage with things like defeating enemies by rewarding you more time to complete the stage for doing so. With that, we complete the final egg, and after of which Eggman puts us up against E101 Beta, which initiates a boss fight. It isn't anything too difficult, and after we cut to the egg carrier being launched, and with an Eggman giving an order to find and capture a tailed frog, which is also the same frog we're after in Big's story. With that though, we take to Station Square. It's here that we play through the Emerald Coast to catch Froggy. Eggman needs him because Froggy is the one who consumed Chaos's tail as well as a Chaos Emerald. However, once we complete the stage, we're taken to a flashback scene, after Gamma tries to identify his location and, unable to, advances to the altar. It's here that he's stopped by Tikal, who mentions that the singing Chow are protected by a being, and that her father wants to destroy the peace and harmony in the name of harvesting the power of the Master Emerald. Keep this in mind, as it will be important later. With that, we cut back to the egg carrier, where all of Gamma's companions are seemingly kicked off the ship for finding the wrong frog, and it's here that we're given a new assignment. Beyond the door, Amy resides with the bird that has a Chaos Emerald, and it's our job to collect the bird from her. However, we enter the wrong door and bestow our sights upon what Eggman does with our fellow robots when he has no need for them. But we leave, and for now, think nothing of it. We have an interaction with Amy that we saw in her story, failing to get the bird and instead letting the two escape, after of which we're told by Eggman to go to the ammunition room and report to the rear of the ship. So after gaining the jet booster, we fight Sonic. Oddly enough, this iteration of the fight sees Amy stopping us as opposed to stopping Sonic, which is contrary to what we see in Tails and Sonic stories. However, this could be due to the implication that these fights that the characters have with one another in the story end with stalemate. After Amy and Tails leave, so do we to the Mystic Ruins. There we delete Eggman as our master, and set off to save our E-Series friends. We begin with Windy Valley, where we save E103 Delta, and then take to Red Mountain, where we rescue E104 Epsilon, after which we head to the egg carrier crash site to locate and rescue E105 Zeta from the hot shelter. Once we leave, we see E101 Beta, this time with an enhanced form. We pursue and initiate a boss fight. This one is definitely more difficult, with more attacks and a new strategy being required to defeat it compared to the first one. After which we defeat it though, we see one final blow to Gamma before the bird within is set free, before we see Gamma be set freed, thus ending Gamma's story. I really liked Gamma's story. It was one that tells a story of a robot becoming sentient and using that to do good and set its peers free before ultimately setting itself free. And I feel that is an amazing way to tell a story from the perspective of someone from the opposing side. Now, for the moment those familiar with this game have been waiting for, I want to talk about the finale of this game, Super Sonic. This can only be unlocked if you complete all of the stories in this game. While I did skip Big Story entirely, I was able to load a previous save file to play this finale, which is how you're seeing this footage. We begin at the Mystic Ruins, where we see Eggman lamenting about his hatred for Sonic, but he notices chaos in the distance. We cut to Angel Island falling once again, and Knuckles' confusion regarding it. When he decides to take the Chaos Emerald he collected when he defeated Chaos 6 at the end of his story, he notices Eggman, who appears to be injured seemingly at the hands of Chaos. We cut to Sonic in the Mystic Ruins and Tails coming to him to ask him to follow. We make our way to the altar, where we see Knuckles and Eggman on the floor. We learn that Chaos is alive, and took the Chaos Emeralds that Knuckles had with him. If he gets that remaining emerald, the entirety of Station Square will be destroyed. But before we set off to find it, we're taken to another flashback scene. We see Esther Carl pleads with her father not to ruin the homes of the Chow and attempt to take the power of the Chaos Emerald, but they don't heed her begging, and go for it regardless. This is where they see Chaos, who seemingly wipes them out. This is where we see Tikal, panicked, seal Chaos as well as herself within the Master Emerald before the rest of the world is destroyed by the now enraged beast. Sonic awakes, and himself alongside Tails go after the final emerald, which is still within the tornado too. Once we reach it, we see Chaos take the final emerald, as he becomes perfect chaos and wreaks havoc upon Station Square. Eggman with the, Egg Carrier 2 arrives and gets blasted by Chaos as he discharges the emeralds, using all of the energy from within. Thousands of years ago, the Echidna tribe had attempted to harvest the power of the 7 Chaos Emeralds for themselves, but in doing so, they would potentially kill the life that resided there, the Chow, protected by the being known as Chaos. After pleading over and over not to go through with this plan, Tikal's father went through with it anyway, and an enraged Chaos wiped the Echidna tribe. Tikal, wanting to prevent Chaos from harming the rest of the world due to his rage, sealed him within the Master Emerald, alongside herself. Here in the present day, Eggman, through the discovery of the stone tablets, used the Chaos Emeralds to unleash the true power of Chaos once again in hopes he could conquer and control it. But alas, this backfired. Chaos, who contained his anger within the Master Emerald for thousands of years, only wanted to unleash his wrath upon the world. It's why Tikal wants us to seal him within the Master Emerald once again. But Sonic disagrees. It won't ease Chaos of his anger and anguish, and it's here, through the help of his friends, he harvests the power of the Chaos Emeralds to turn into Super Sonic to neutralize perfect chaos. Because despite being depleted, the Chaos Emeralds have the ability to turn thoughts into power. With that, we fight perfect chaos. And what an amazing final boss this is. With the first phase having the opening theme, Open Your Heart, playing in the background. I loved this fight. It was climactic with the music, and second phase being an increase in difficulty and change in music. Being more climactic and setting the stage for the stakes of what could potentially happen to be fully emphasized. This boss fight is phenomenal, and the entire game's worth of selling Chaos as a threat to the story fully pays off here. After the fight, we watch Chaos, now neutralized and calm, ascend with Tikal. As Sonic notices Eggman getting away, he pursues, beginning the same way it started. It was once a night that saw Sonic roaming the city in search of adventure, now ends with Sonic leaving the destroyed yet saved city in pursuit of another adventure, finally ending Sonic Adventure. Sonic Adventure is an outstanding game, and with that, I want to talk about some of the extras in this game. As I've made an effort to make clear in this video, I think Sonic Adventure is a fantastic game. It's one that I enjoyed deeply and one that I loved when I played it. The game's storytelling and the way it presents its story in small parts throughout the duration of the game is masterful and an amazing detail. The story and the arcs that the characters go through in this game is also an amazing advancement for what was going to be the game that was the first step into the next era of Sonic at the time. Sonic Adventure is amazing, however, it still has its issues, one that stem from either age or other factors. For example, the port I played, Sonic Adventure DX, has multiple issues such as that of the voice direction being interesting to say the least. At the time this game was being produced, voice direction in video games at the time was definitely at a point where it wasn't as good as it is now, leading to several voice lines in the game coming off as oddly placed or delivered. I'm not going to fault the actors for this, since while the poor direction gave me a chuckle at times, it didn't necessarily bother me as much. There's also the presentation of the cutscenes in the game, any of which that isn't the CG cutscenes in the game use in-engine cutscenes with pre-existing animations from the game, and at times this tends to look odd. There's also the issue of there being long and awkward pauses at times. For example, Knuckles' cutscene here. Again, to me, this is simply due to age and how technology wasn't as advanced as it was now, and furthermore, this doesn't necessarily bother me as much as it may bother others. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, while I complimented the game in that regard with the exception of Big the Cat, it still has its issues. For example, the camera for the most part being unreliable and difficult to work with at times, being positioned in awkward spots, making it difficult to navigate your character without falling off a platform. Furthermore, there were times where it'd go beneath the map or in positions where I couldn't even see my character, making it difficult to play through a stage. Despite that though, I still really enjoyed this game, and I want to take this opportunity to discuss some of the extra content within. Many of us know that Sonic games generally tend to encourage replayability in some way, and this game is no exception. This game encourages replayability through the form of emblems and missions. The missions that you do in the main story is that of Mission C, to complete the stage for the story's progression. However, in missions B and A, you'd have to complete the stage with some criteria needing to be met. For example, completing a stage with 50 rings or within a certain time limit. Of course, while this is a good way of encouraging replayability, it definitely isn't as effective as the ranking system that future titles would go on to receive. Nonetheless though, I think that Sonic Adventure is a phenomenal game that does a stellar job with both delivering a wonderful first time experience as well as bringing players back after playing through the main story. With that, I want to conclude things then. I think that Sonic Adventure is a phenomenal game. Everything from the story, the gameplay and other aspects of this game are outstanding to me, and I enjoy and appreciate this game for its efforts to be something fantastic, because it accomplishes that greatly. To put it simply, I love this game, and while it undeniably has its issues, either stemming from age or sloppy design, I feel as though I'm able to look past that and enjoy this game for what it is and what it's able to accomplish. This game, in a way, played an important role in the franchise of Sonic the Hedgehog and the direction it would take going forward, and in a way, it played an important role to 3D platforming as a whole. It set so many precedents and examples, and it was the foundation for future games in the franchise. Sonic Adventure is amazing. While some areas, such as the visuals and story presentation, are sullied by age, this game is still an enjoyable must-play for those who haven't already. So, if you've yet to play this game, I'd highly recommend doing so. Good evening to those bored enough to watch. Approximately 3 months ago, I made a video about Sonic Adventure, a game that I enjoyed thoroughly and thought of it to be a phenomenal game. I still hold that opinion towards this game. I think that it holds up and it deserves the praise that it gets even to this day. Now, in my Sonic Colors Ultimate video, I stated that I'd be talking about Sonic Adventure 2 at a later date, and in this video, I'm here to do just that. Sonic Adventure was a brilliant game. Nothing can ever take that away from it. Many still hold that game close to their hearts, myself included, and all you need to do is play the game to find out why. Sure, it's dated in some ways, such as that of the graphics and whatnot, but it continues to be an outstanding game. Now, as much as I love Sonic Adventure, there exists Sonic games other than itself that I hold dear to me, one of them being Sonic Adventure 2. Now, I had played this game for myself for the first time not long after I played the first game, and I had a blast with it. Sonic Adventure 2 seeks to build upon its predecessor in a multitude of ways, such as that of the gameplay, the music, and the story. Sonic Adventure 2's development began shortly after the completion of the American release of Sonic Adventure in 1998, lasting over 18 months. The game was ultimately intended to be more of an action-oriented game more rather than the adventure-oriented gameplay that embodied the previous game. Furthermore, the game was being developed by Sonic Team USA, which was a former American division of Sonic Team, with contributions from Takashi Iizuka and Yuji Naka. One of the main objectives behind this game was taking the things that worked with the previous game and strengthening them, while ultimately ignoring others. This saw many changes to the gameplay be made. For example, the adventure fields in the previous game would ultimately be dropped, alongside Amy Rose and Big the Cat as playable characters. Tails' gameplay would also be changed from what we saw in the previous game to adapt more of E102 Gamma's playstyle. Additionally, the story was also a component of the game that the team wanted to expand upon, and in order to tell the story, it was decided that new characters would need to be introduced into the franchise, thus seeing the debut of characters such as that of Shadow the Hedgehog and Rouge the Bat. With that, the team decided to focus on 3 of the gameplay styles from the previous game: Sonic, Knuckles, and E102 Gammas. These 3 forms of gameplay would then be distributed among the 6 playable characters in the game. While there are a multitude of ideas that saw their implementation into Sonic Adventure 2, some were ultimately dropped from the final product, an example being that of branching pathways in the story. As mentioned earlier, Sonic Team USA was developing this game, which ultimately saw Takashi Iizuka needing to move to an office in the USA, primarily that of San Francisco. This is reflected upon in the game, as many of the levels take inspiration from that of the respective city. Now, one of the many differences between this game's development and the previous is that in the latter, the team had tried to implement as much content as possible, whereas in this game they only focused on implementing content they deemed as necessary. Development on this game was also much more streamlined and easier due to the team's growth and experience experience with the Dreamcast's hardware, with Yuji Naka describing it as them being able to tap the full power of the console and deliver a much better experience. Ultimately, a lot of work went into this game. It shows that the team had decided to create a game that was expansive on the previous in a multitude of ways, with them now being able to achieve a much more streamlined experience in developing the game with their newfound experience in working with the Dreamcast's hardware, and their newfound experience ultimately shows within the game itself. This game is polished, and despite the issues I personally have with it, Sonic Adventure 2 is one of my favourite Sonic games. I think it's brilliant, and in this video, I want to discuss why. So, with that, let's discuss Sonic Adventure 2. In Sonic Adventure 1, you are able to play through the same story through 6 different perspectives, ranging from Sonic to Big the Cat. Now, while this is a good idea for making the story feel expansive, it ultimately presents a lot of issues, that being that of the gameplay. 6 different forms of such a thing is bound to lead to some of them sticking better than others, and as mentioned previously, this game sees the return of 3 of the 6 styles in the previous. Ultimately, this warrants a change to the way in which we witness the story of this game unfold. In Sonic Adventure 2, we play the game through the hero and dark story, telling the same story but from differing perspectives of the heroes and villains of the story. While you can certainly play through any first, it's clear that the intended experience is to play through the hero story first. So, with that, the game begins with the iconic scene consisting of Sonic escaping from an airborne helicopter. This scene is brilliantly executed. It serves as an adrenaline-rushing beginning to the game. It gets the player hooked with the game starting in media res of Sonic jumping off a helicopter and into the city below him. The player doesn't know what led him here, but as the scene transitions into the first stage of the game, there is no time to question such a thing. So with that, we begin the first stage, City Escape. What I'm going to say about this stage is akin to what many others have also said about it, that this stage is nothing short of brilliant. Sonic's gameplay has evolved considerably since the previous game. While such a thing was a good foundation, the stages were unfortunately littered with things like bad collision which disrupted the flow of the stage and whatnot, all of which seems to have been fixed here. The team's growth and experience with the Dreamcast is shown immaculately in this action-packed stage. So with that, we beat the stage and find ourselves in a boss fight against a military agent of some kind, of which isn't too difficult. So subsequently to this, we're shown a cutscene, depicting the debut of Shadow the Hedgehog. I think that this is a well executed debut for his character. He's ominous at the beginning of the game, where we learn nothing about him except for his name and that he shares similar properties to that of Sonic. We also see him use Chaos Control, before he leaves and we're caught by the military once again. Cutting to the desert, we find Knuckles in the debut of Rouge the Bat, a character of whom we also know little about, other than she appears to hunt for jewels as a hobby and not much else. With that, we witness as Eggman attempts to steal the Master Emerald, though Knuckles intervenes, breaking it before he can get away with it. After that, we see as Knuckles is briefly scolded by Rouge as we enter Knuckles' first stage of the game, Wild Canyon. One of the many things I want to get out of the way is that I do not like Knuckles' gameplay in this game, primarily due to the stages and how unnecessarily big they are compared to the previous game's stages. Yes, Sonic Adventure 1's rendition of Knuckles' gameplay saw sections of Sonic's stages be repurposed. However, they were small in size while offering enough of a challenge to find the emerald pieces. All that had to be done in my opinion was make the stages of that similar size, and without Tikal to give the locations of the pieces away, it could have been better than the previous game. Furthermore, they also changed the mechanics to the gameplay to ensure that the indicator depicting how close you are to a piece only went off for one piece at a time, which is a change that makes the game unnecessarily cumbersome to play through. While Wild Canyon is decent in terms of the stages, others such as that of Pumpkin Hill, Aquatic Mine and later stages subsequent to that are cumbersome to play through. With that, we complete the stage and enter a cutscene of Tails travelling to Prison Island, monologuing about how he believes Sonic wouldn't do the things that he's recently been accused of, as seen previously. Sonic has been wrongfully captured by the military as they seem to mistake him for Shadow. However, as Tails notices Amy and Eggman, he takes a detour to confront Eggman, thus initiating a boss fight. Tails' gameplay is an extension to what we've previously seen in E102 Gamma's gameplay. While there is no time limit, we need to shoot our way through the stages as a form of defense, as we only have limited health of which can be replenished through obtainable items and also rings throughout his stages. So with that, after we defeat Eggman, we enter Tails' first stage, Prison Lane. Tails' gameplay is definitely very fast paced, akin to that of Sonic's, and it's certainly a very enjoyable one at that. With that, after we beat the stage, we cut to Amy, who somehow managed to make it to Sonic before Tails, and after learning that Shadow was also here alongside Eggman, Sonic is freed from his cell by Amy, and thus we begin Metal Harbor, another brilliant stage. This stage is one that introduces the light shoes, which allows for us to perform the light speed dash from the previous game. One of the many things I've noticed is that this game is one that uses a lot of action set pieces within. For example, in City Escape, we have a truck from Gun, the military that was after Sonic, that chases after us during a section of that stage, and in this one we now board a missile as it launches into the sky and then fall from it in order to reach the goal ring. I think that this is a great addition to the game. It helps with keeping the stages distinct and unique from one another, as each one is now made to be even more memorable from one another. With that, we reach the jungle where we happen to run into Shadow. After the two interact, we engage in a boss fight with him. It shouldn't pose us too much of a difficulty, so after of which we enter Green Forest. Learning that Eggman plans to blow up the island, Sonic rushes through the forest to find Amy and Tails. This stage is also phenomenal. I think that it's great to see that the game keeps finding new ways to make the stages interesting and memorable. This stage is definitely that of an adrenaline rush of sorts, as you only have 8 minutes to clear the stage. However, after that, we cut to Prison Island blowing up, with Sonic, Tails and Amy getting away just in time. Back with Knuckles, we play through Pumpkin Hill. As mentioned before, I really do not like this stage, as well as Knuckles' gameplay, and this stage is an example as to why. In this stage, we're to traverse through this vast area in search of 3 of the emerald pieces, a lot of it being consistent of islands of which are long distances away from each other, in which you must also travel to and from with a camera that is very difficult to work with. I do not like this stage, and that extends to Knuckles' gameplay as a whole. The camera is something that has been an issue throughout the entirety of the game in terms of trying to navigate such a thing. However, it was something that I never brought up due to the fact that the others' gameplay didn't necessarily require for the camera navigation as much as Knuckles' does, and it becomes a prominent issue when you're trying to glide through different areas only for the camera to begin making things difficult for you. Furthermore, the size of this stage in particular doesn't necessarily aid with much. With there being so much you need to explore, factored in with the difficult camera, these stages can be a pain to play, and for me it essentially boiled down to just wandering around for 10 minutes hoping to run into the pieces of the emerald, or just going to the hints and trying to decipher something from there. But with the camera acting strangely, I lose my way and thus need to find my way back to where I was, assuming death hadn't taken me first. That aside, we beat the stage and cut to Eggman broadcasting himself across the city, as he vows to rule the world. Is this cutscene familiar to anyone? He blows up half of the moon, and thus we cut to Sonic, Tails and Amy discussing such a thing from afar. They need to find Eggman, and Tails pulls a Chaos Emerald, one of which is later revealed to be one that he was awarded after saving the city in the previous game, and splits up with Sonic to find a way out of their pursuer's grasp. This stage is definitely a great one to play through, though at times the camera can definitely get in the way of progressing through the stage. Though with that aside, we complete the stage and cut back to Knuckles, whom finds himself in the aquatic mine, thus warranting the stage. I use this stage as an example as to why I don't like Knuckles' stages, and that's due to the fact that I think that it's simply too crowded to be able to accommodate Knuckles' gameplay. Factored in with the camera being difficult to work with, swimming in this stage is suddenly a big pain in the neck. However, with that stage complete, we cut back to Tails and Amy who are still trying to track down Eggman's location, alluding to the idea that the 6 other Chaos Emeralds may be in outer space. While the two converse with Sonic, Knuckles emerges from the sewers, though there's no time to be talking, as Tails has managed to track the transcript between the President and Eggman, giving them a lead. With that, they follow the President's limo through Route 101. Played through a brief minigame seeing us navigate Tails as he pursues the President. After this, we listen in as the President is forced to surrender to the Eggman Empire, before Sonic arrives with Tails, where the two find out where Eggman is transmitting from, the Space Colony Ark. We cut to the group standing outside a pyramid, seemingly that of Eggman's base, as Knuckles appears to have seen Eggman and Rouge entering. With that, Tails departs to find an entrance, thus initiating the stage Hidden Base. After of which we find ourselves at the door to the center of the base. However, the door's locked, and to find the key, we rely on Knuckles to do so, thus initiating the stage, the Death Chamber. There isn't really much for me to say about this stage that I haven't already, so after completing the stage, we find ourselves in a boss fight against King Boom Boo. In order to defeat him, you need to try and move around him to hit this hourglass here, after of which a crack of sunlight will emerge from the hole it revealed, allowing for a window of time of which can be used to attack. After you beat this fight, we finally run into Eggman who summons the Egg Golem, thus initiating that boss fight. For this one, you need to reach his back, climb the steps and hit the button on his head to deal damage. After the fight, we cut to the space shuttle moving for takeoff, with Sonic and the others finally reaching the Ark. However, when they crash into a rock, the pieces of the Master Emerald scatter into space, and Knuckles attempts to leave, and thus, Sonic, Tails and Amy are left to execute their plan to prevent Eggman from firing his weapon again. The Space Colony Ark was once an advanced research center, before it was shut down 50 years ago after a terrible accident had occurred. But enough backstory. As of right now, Tails and Sonic intend to use their fake emerald that Tails had created after studying the real one to swap it out before the weapon is fired. But before that, Tails departs to find the power supply and destroy it, leaving Sonic to find the control room. So with that, we begin the stage, Eternal Engine, which sees Tails endeavoring into the Ark to find the power supply, after of which we cut to Sonic in the control room just 45 minutes before the Ark is set to fire its cannon. Though before the two can act from there, Eggman interrupts their transmission, telling Tails to inform Sonic to meet him at the research facility of the Ark. We regress back to 1 hour and 26 minutes before the cannon is set to fire. We find Knuckles in search of the emerald pieces once more, thus beginning the stage, Meteor Herd. In my opinion, I think that Knuckles' stages gradually get worse as the game game goes on. The stages are either too big to find just 3 emeralds within, or are just too crowded, and the camera doesn't exactly do itself any favors either. With that, we run into Rouge the Bat, someone of whom demands the emeralds Knuckles has been seeking. However, when he refuses, we begin the fight. This fight shouldn't be too difficult, and with it ending in stalemate, we end with a cutscene showing the two arguing before Rouge trips and nearly falls into the lava, hadn't Knuckles saved her. After of which, she gives him the emeralds, and with the two seemingly on good terms, they part ways. This is, thankfully, the last of the treasure hunting stages for the hero story, and with that, we cut back to Sonic, who needs to find Eggman, thus beginning the stage Crazy Gadget. This stage is definitely a difficult one. With the camera continually shifting and whatnot, it could certainly become a perplexing one to play through at times. However, after completing the stage, we arrive at a cutscene. Eggman offering that if Sonic were to hand over the emerald, he'll let Amy go. With Sonic deciding to hand over the fake emerald, he places it down, before Eggman traps him within a space shuttle, revealing that he already knew it was a fake. And with that, Sonic is sent back down to Earth. With the shuttle about to blow, we see him reminisce on what Tails had told him about the emerald. The same wavelength and properties as a real one, but less powerful. With that, we see Sonic contemplating whether he can pull something off before we see the space shuttle blow up. From within the Ark, Tails, determined now more than ever to put a stop to Eggman's plan, takes him on in a fight. This fight shouldn't be anything of significant difficulty, so after defeating him, we cut to Knuckles, who is outside the colony Ark, feeling some strange energy of sorts. He sees Sonic teleport before him. He had managed to use Chaos Control to get out of the shuttle before it blew up. Asking Knuckles to aid Tails and Amy, he plans to use the fake emerald to place it into the cannon before it blows up, thus initiating the final stage of the hero story, the final rush. This stage is definitely one that is adrenaline pumping and is one of my favorites in this game, though after completing the stage, we run into Shadow. As the two begin running, we begin the boss fight against Shadow. This fight sees you needing to attack him as you both run down this never-ending lane, though do be sure not to stay in the same place for too long, as you may fall alongside the platform. I really like this fight. Shadow is a character of whom had no respect for Sonic and simply saw him as an imposter of himself, but this time the two fight on mutual ground. They see each other as equals of sorts. After this fight, we cut back to Tails and Amy finally getting communication from Sonic. With Eggman secretly taking hold of the real Chaos Emerald, the two watch as Sonic stops the cannon, thus ending the hero story of this game. Sonic Adventure 2 is split into two different stories, the hero story and the dark story. Among the final story once both are complete, of which I'll discuss in due course. So with that, let's discuss the dark story. The game's story is seen from the differing perspectives of the many characters, and what they were doing during their respective moments in the game. For example, this story sees Eggman infiltrating a top secret military base, in search of a project that his grandfather had been working on, thus initiating the first stage, Iron Gate. This stage is intense, with an abundance of enemies attacking you among other things. I'm sure you may have noticed, the 3 gameplay forms are split between the 6 different characters in the game, with little to minor differences between the characters. After we complete the stage, watch as Eggman hacks into the console, releasing the workings of his grandfather, Shadow the Hedgehog. Granting Eggman a wish, Shadow takes on a Bigfoot agent, after of which he tells Eggman to gather more Chaos Emeralds and meet him at the control room of the space colony Ark. This leads into the encounter between Knuckles and Rouge, and is why we see Eggman trying to take the Master Emerald, thus prompting it to be broken by Knuckles, thus initiating for us to play as Rouge, who shares the same gameplay as Knuckles. While this gameplay is the same, the stages definitely are where the differences lie, and as with Knuckles' first stage being decent and tolerable at best, the same applies with Rouge, though one of the many things I want to discuss is that of the Emerald radar displayed at the bottom. As mentioned earlier, in Sonic Adventure 1, the radar would go off depending on whether you were close to an emerald, regardless of which one it was. In this game, the radar only goes off for one emerald at a time, meaning you could spend large durations of time aimlessly running around in search of the emerald pieces, or you could get lucky and accidentally run into one like I did. This isn't exactly a good thing when you realize that the stages are significantly much larger than they were in the previous game, and thus you would possibly be roaming more areas several times in hopes the radar may go off. However, with that we beat the stage and cut back to Eggman returning to his base, thus initiating the stage, Sand Ocean. After we complete this stage, we find Eggman in his base, checking as his console reports the ongoing news that Sonic has been accused of robbing a bank of a Chaos Emerald, though we know that this is the work of Shadow the Hedgehog. Thus, we cut to Shadow, remembering the promise he had made to Maria, seemingly to take revenge, thus beginning the stage, Radical Highway. After of which, we cut back to Rouge, who is attempting to find the key to enter Eggman's base, thus beginning the stage, Egg Quarters. After we complete that stage, Rouge finds out that Eggman has already left the Ark, and thus follows him in. Back with Eggman, we see him finding his way to the control room that Shadow had mentioned before, thus beginning the stage, Lost Colony. After completing this stage, we see as Eggman meets with Shadow, who introduces him to the project that his grandfather had been working on, the Eclipse Cannon. This weapon has the capability to destroy an entire planet, but requires large amounts of power that only the 7 Chaos Emeralds are able to supply. So with that, Eggman tells Shadow that he'll gather more emeralds. However, before anything can be set in stone, Rouge shows up and proposes a deal with Eggman. As a treasure hunter, she's capable of finding the Chaos Emerald, and all she asks is for the radar that allowed for Eggman to find the Master Emerald. So with that, after a nod of approval from Shadow, Eggman accepts. We cut to Prison Island, as the three hatch a plan to get the Chaos Emeralds within the island. While Eggman acts as a distraction for the military troops, allowing for Rouge to sneak in without being detected, Shadow is to place dynamite on the island, and so with that, we play through the stage's weapons bed as Eggman, after of which the three prepare to execute their plan before Amy arrives, mistaking Shadow for Sonic. Eggman instructs the two to go forth, while he deals with Amy. However, Tails arrives, and thus we enter a boss fight. We cut back to Rouge, who is now within the base ready to find the emeralds while Shadow waits in position. She speaks the rather death-defying words of 5 minutes being plenty, and thus we begin the stage, Security Hall. This stage is definitely a lot more difficult than the others. Normally you'd have a lot of time to wander the stages and come across the emeralds either by chance or through the use of the hints. However, in this stage you only have 5 minutes, thus requiring for you to act fast and search as frantically as possible. Thankfully the stage is somewhat small and easy to memorize to accommodate this challenge, and somehow I managed to score an A rank at the end of it. After we complete the stage, we're caught by a military agent and we enter a boss fight, after of which Rouge becomes trapped. Back with Shadow, who's still waiting on the others, he receives a transmission from Rouge over the radio, stating that she's been trapped. Reminded of Maria, Shadow eventually rushes to save Rouge, thus beginning the stage, White Jungle. I also really like this stage. The rush to save Rouge is really emphasized with the timer and the other elements of the stage, though after that, we run into Sonic and engage in a boss fight. After defeating him, we save Rouge and cut to a flashback scene. Shadow was discussing life on Earth with Maria, who's seemingly never been there before, with him telling her that Gerald Robotnik had dedicated his life's work for the happiness and convenience of those on Earth, yet he still doesn't know why he was created. That maybe, just maybe if he ventured down there, he'd have a chance of finding out. We cut back to Rouge and Shadow, discussing his heroic deed of saving her and how uncharacteristic it was of him to do so. Eggman arrives with the 6 Chaos Emeralds as they fire a test run on the cannon, thus leading to the moon being shot, and thus we cut back to the trio. Eggman is seemingly annoyed as the cannon will take too long to recharge, and at that rate, they will require all of the Chaos Emeralds. Rouge pulls out the newspaper, showing Tails' achievement as saving Station Square in the previous game and how it earned him a Chaos Emerald as a result. So they have a new mission in mind, to track down Tails and take the emerald currently in his possession. Eggman and Shadow leave, while Rouge stays to report something, unable to confirm whether Shadow was the ultimate life form, but states the continuation of her research to confirm her suspicions. So with that, we find ourselves on Route 280, as she'd managed to track down Tails' location through the emerald. After completing the stage, we cut to Shadow, awaiting an update from Rouge. When she finally tells him that Tails has been spotted, he bounces into pursuit, thus beginning the stage, Skyrail. This stage is definitely quite an interesting one, as it revolves around that of grinding on rails, which has a great feel to it while doing so. Other than that, after we complete the stage, we watch as Tails takes off, with Eggman telling Shadow to leave him be. We cut back to the heroes, which just saw Sonic defeat the Egg Golem and break the restraining device, thus requiring for Eggman to fight it too. Back with Rouge, she tricks Eggman into giving her the password for the control console, and thus begins looking into Shadow, and after being shocked by something, she notices that the pieces of the Master Emerald are missing, and thus goes after them herself, thus warranting the stage, Mad Space. When playing through the stage, it almost felt as if though it saw Knuckles' iteration of this section of the game and tried to make it worse in every way possible. Instead of being a big stage in width, it's now a stage that is not only as such, but also much bigger vertically, meaning that there are different layers and thus different sections you need to traverse through. With that aside, after completing the stage, we fight Knuckles, thus warranting the same ordeal witnessed in the hero story. After that, we cut back to Shadow and Eggman, of whom wonder the whereabouts of Rouge, but more importantly, they notice the fake emerald that Sonic and Tails had been planning to use against them. With that, Eggman intends to go back to the Ark to confront them, but before he leaves, he tells Shadow that should anything happen to himself, he's relying on him to finish the job. With that, we begin the stage, Cosmic Wall. After completing the stage, Eggman captures Amy and thus the cutscene consisting of Sonic being sent out into space ensues, after of which we fight Tails. Following this, we cut to Shadow, of whom watches as Sonic blows up on the shuttle. We see Rouge, of whom attempts to steal the Chaos Emerald before Shadow intervenes. It turns out that Rouge is actually a government spy, sent to investigate the ultimate life form and whether Shadow was the product of the project. However, with the image depicting a different creature, Rouge is left confused by Shadow, in which he states that his memories may not be real either, but Shadow combats this. Real or fake, he's still Shadow, and he has a promise to fulfill. So with that, we enter the stage, Final Chase, as Eggman detects someone making their way to the Eclipse cannon. After completing the stage, we fight Sonic and cut back to Eggman, of whom is about to activate the cannon before something goes wrong, thus ending the dark story. As Eggman tries to decipher why the cannon isn't firing, he finds his grandfather on the screen. Back with Sonic and Knuckles, they feel a vibration on the Ark before Rouge appears, telling them that this may be the end. The Ark is nearing towards the Earth at a large velocity, and should it be impacted, it'd be the end. We then see Gerald Robotnik plastered across the world, as he announces the arrival of the Ark towards the Earth. Back with Sonic, Eggman appears with the diary of his grandfather. In it, we hear the story of how 50 years ago, Gerald Robotnik had created the ultimate life form with the intention of benefiting mankind. However, one day the military landed on the Ark and intended to shut down the project by force, resulting in the death of many, as his research was destroyed. This, in turn, led to the death of Maria Robotnik, his granddaughter, kickstarting Gerald's thirst for revenge as he went insane planning such a thing. Fearing his own inability to control his vengeful thoughts, he finished the project he had been working on, Shadow the Hedgehog. Eggman had inadvertently pulled the plan that his grandfather had hatched all those years ago into action as he ventured into the space colony with world domination in mind, but little did he know that he was only taking the steps closer to fulfilling his grandfather's plan for revenge. So with that, the others come up with a plan to stop the cannon. As it's currently being supplied by the overpowered energy from the Chaos Emeralds, perhaps Knuckles could use the Master Emerald to stop them, thus meaning we'd need to get to the cannon's core, thus initiating the stage. In this stage, we play as Tails, Eggman, Rouge, Knuckles, and Sonic. This is definitely one of the more longer stages in the game as you cycle through playing through nearly all of the characters in the story. However, after of which we cut to Amy, of whom is wandering the colony. She spots Shadow and decides to ask him to aid the others in stopping the impact. Shadow states that there isn't a point. There's nothing that can be done as he's already fulfilled his promise to Maria to take revenge. That had been his goal this entire time and he has no intention of doing anything further. But through the pledge of Amy, he's able to remember the real promise he made. It's revealed that throughout the game, Shadow had been misremembering. He promised to protect the world and give the citizens of the Earth a chance of happiness. That is what he was created for. With a single tear streaming down his face, he springs into action. Back with Sonic and Knuckles, as they attempt to reach the Chaos Emeralds, they're stopped by the Bio Lizard, the prototype of the ultimate lifeform that Gerald had been working on. Just as they're about to engage, Shadow arrives, telling the two to proceed while he takes care of business with the Bio Lizard, thus initiating the boss fight. Subsequently to winning, we see as Knuckles attempts to stop the power of the Chaos Emeralds, though despite stopping the Emeralds, the Ark is still on a crash course to Earth. With the situation now more desperate than ever, and seemingly nothing else that can be done, Sonic and Shadow harness the power of the Chaos Emerald, and thus begin the final boss fight against the Bio Lizard once more. This fight is one of the best I've ever had in a Sonic game. This one is even more climactic than the one in the previous game. Not only is this a fight against a much greater enemy, but it's also a fight against the clock, emphasized through the different characters telling you how much time you have left before the Ark hits the Earth. It's genuinely an amazing fight that not only provides a great challenge, but is also expansive of the climax throughout the game, especially with the game's main theme, Live and Learn, playing in the background throughout the entire thing. I really do love this fight. Though with that, we finish the fight and watch as Sonic and Shadow stop the crash. With Shadow remembering the words of Maria one last time, they use Chaos Control one last time to finally put an end to the Ark's approach towards the Earth. As cheers of celebration echo throughout the world, Shadow, unable to maintain his super form, falls down to the Earth. Sonic returns to the Ark without him, handing the only remnant left of Shadow to Rouge. As the credits roll, we watch as the characters reflect upon the journey they finally reached the end of. A very moving section. They all put their rivalries aside and simply listen to one another. For example, Tails listening to Eggman as he reflects upon how he looked up to his grandfather, left lost at the thought of his true intention being to destroy the Earth and everyone on it. Or Sonic, for who the first time grieves the loss of a friend, yet hides their insecurity from the others and simply beckons everyone to return home. As he's the last to leave, he looks back and melancholically speaks the words, "Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog." Following the completion of the game, there are a lot of things you can do. For example, this is the game where the ranking system that would go on to become a staple in every game following this one was introduced, meaning you can go back and A-rank all of the stages in this game. The ranking system in this game is definitely one of the more unforgiving ones, as it requires perfect precision with playing through them and a single mistake could cost you your chance at such a thing. One of the many things I want to discuss is that of the level of detail that went into this game. For example, the very stage selection screen, and how it maps the stages and where the character was during such a period of time. Not only does this allow for one to get a better understanding of the story and the timeline of events, but it allows for one to see how the different characters met at a specific time. An example being that of Sonic and Shadow and how both were unknowingly traveling towards one another, leading to them meeting at the beginning of the hero story. This game is designed with a lot of replayability in mind, however, it isn't perfect. One of the many things I dislike about the game is an entire third of its gameplay. But looking past the fact that I roll my eyes every time I play through the treasure hunting stages, I found this game to be one of the most enjoyable games I've ever indulged in. Now, another one of the things I want to discuss is that of the characters and how well executed the continuity is from the previous game. In such a thing, a lot of characters such as Tails finally found their independence and had gone through their own arcs of sorts. For example, Tails had strived to become more independent, something of which is expanded upon heavily in this game as he plays a more vital role in the hero story. For those who watched my video about Sonic Forces, you'd know that I used this game in particular as an example for why I personally did not like the character writing in that game. Following on from the example I used in that video and how Tails ultimately cowers in fear from something he not only has faced before but in other situations he would fight, in this this game, he sees that Eggman has just disposed of Sonic in the space shuttle that just exploded, and uses that to fuel his desire to be more of use to Sonic and show that he's much more than his shadow. I think that should go to show that Sonic Adventure 2 is a game that won't hesitate to fire in multiple directions and continue the continuity and character writing that the previous game had kickstarted. It goes to show that Sonic Team really did put their all into making this game, and so with that, I want to conclude things. Sonic Adventure 2 is a brilliant game. Despite me disliking some aspects of this game, I hope that this video has made my stance regarding that evidently clear. This game represents a lot for this franchise. It represents its peak. It represents the best of what this franchise is capable of creating. To think that this is what kids media was capable of coming out with during that period in time is mind-boggling to me. Especially now with the games having been so hesitant to take the steps into telling a much darker and mature story, Sonic Adventure 2 truly does represent a lot of what this series had strived to do in direction. The fact that it took an entire decade with the release of Sonic Frontiers for this series to finally stop being so hesitant to go back to its former storytelling is truly representative of what sets the series apart from its different time periods. Who knows, maybe Sonic Team finally realized that their lack of hesitance to tell stories that they told before is what made games like Sonic Adventure 2 so brilliant. Among the gameplay and other factors such as that of the music, Sonic Adventure 2 isn't just one of my favorite Sonic games, it's one of my favorite games as a whole, and for that reason, I wholeheartedly recommend playing this game. It truly is amazing.